Okay, this is still about greatest common factors. It's just specifically about factoring out a negative. So a negative can be considered like a greatest common factor. There will be times that you need or want to factor out a negative. Now we could look at this and just factor out the r to begin with, and then we would have 6r plus, negative 6r plus 5. Or, and what I like, my rule of thumb is if there's a negative at the on the first term, I usually always factor out a negative number. So let's do this one again. I factor out the negative. 6r squared plus 5r. So if I factor out, and if I'm just factoring out the negative, just so you know, every time you factor out a negative, it changes the sign of everything behind it. I'm going to say that again. Every time you factor out a negative, it changes the sign of everything behind it. So what I'm left with here, if I'm not going to factor out the r, we'll do that in a second, would be positive 6r squared, because this was negative, it changes its sign, now it's positive r, and this becomes negative 5r. Because this was a positive, it changes its sign, it's now negative. If I wanted to check this, negative times a positive is a negative 6r squared, and a negative times a negative is a positive, and so I come back to the exact same thing that I started with. Let's do this one just one more time and actually factor out all of the greatest common factor. And so in actuality, we'll factor out a negative r, and we are left with positive 6r minus 5. Again, if I check this, negative r times positive 6r gives me negative 6r squared, and negative r times negative 5 gives me positive 5r. And once again, I've come back to exactly where I started. And that is factoring out a negative. We'll see that more as we go on. Thanks.